It's now my pleasure to introduce our next set of speakers, and we're going to be talking now about Refugee Mental Health and Wellness Initiative. It's going to be led by Jack Richman, the Dean of the UN School of Social Work, and he's also going to have Josh Hinton with him, clinical instructor, UNC School of Social Work, and some students. Jack, as you know, is a professor and Dean of the School of Social Work, which has a very distinctive tradition at that school of excellence in graduate work and education dating back to 1920. Under Jack's leadership, the school has ranked in the top 5 graduate programs nationally by U.S. News and World Reports. He's served as the dean since 2001, and he joined the school more than 30 years ago as assistant dean and director of studies. He's the co-author of several books, and he was named in the British Journal of Social Work's list of the 100 most highly cited articles in social work journals in the last decade. So people are reading and following your work, Jack. He's also a frequent lecturer in international venues, visiting scholar in China, India, Israel, Lithuania, and Britain, and he is also deeply, deeply dedicated to the mission of the school and its impact in the state. Today, they're going to discuss with us the Refugee Mental Health and Wellness Initiative, which is a collaborative project with the school that they launched last year with the Durham nonprofit and with the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants.
Wow.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everybody. We're very pleased to be here. The School of Social Work is much smaller than what you just heard about in terms of healthcare at UNC. We offer an MSW program for a master's degree in social work and a PhD degree in social work for our educational programs. We are arguably the national leader in intervention research, which really relates to what we're talking about today in terms of what kinds of intervention works best for what kind of individuals and families in our communities. And that's really what we're about, testing effective and efficient intervention methods that solve social and health problems that face our communities. So today we are talking about actually something I didn't know much about until the last couple of years when faculty at the school have developed this, the Refugee Mental Health and Wellness Initiative. This was actually funded by their 2 UNC supporting families, the Armfield and the Reeves, and they provided some expendable funds to the School of Social Work called the Armfield-Reeves Innovation Fund. And it's not, by development standards, it's not a huge amount of money, but it allows pilot data to be collected and small programs to be started to see whether or not they actually work. And that's the whole point of innovation. Before you really go out and get federal funding or national private foundation funding, it's always better to test it and see if you know what you're doing. So what I think is I've invited faculty member Josh Hinton and several students who he will introduce to join me today to talk about this program. So the reason why I picked it was that our mission is, and the UNC's mission, is global, national, state, and community. And I chose this program to talk about because it really encompasses all of that. Further, it's a wonderful example of how education and research and service are dovetailed to involve faculty and students and community agencies, and it's funded primarily by private dollars. So really, I think it really encompasses so much of what we're talking about. In 2013, there were 2,419 refugees from across the globe that were prioritized by the United States Department of Homeland Security to come to North Carolina. Actually, there are 70,000 refugees that are brought to this country from Homeland Security, and I'll show you a slide if I can actually make this thing work. Let's see. Yes. They start with Homeland Security, they go to Citizen and Immigration Services, and then to the United States Department of State, and then to the U.S. Department Reception and Placement Office, and then to the North Carolina Refugee Assistance Program, which is a state agency, and then they're brought to North Carolina communities. So from the 70,000 refugees, North Carolina has accepted almost 3,000, and they are living among us. These become citizens. They live primarily here in the Triangle, the Triad, and Mecklenburg and Craven counties to the south. So once refugee status is established, they go through this process, and these 70,000 people come to this country and basically are going to be supported primarily in terms of language and social services, and they're attempting to become American citizens and live here. These are the largest countries that they come from, the numbers for last year. And you can see there are a lot of these people who have worked with us in terms of military theaters that the United States is involved in. These are people who may have been translators, who may have collaborated with our military, and hence they cannot stay in the countries that they're in because they may be considered in danger. And so eventually they come down to our state agency, and the North Carolina Refugee Social Services provides a number of things for them. They help them get into schools, they get training, educational support, employment assistance, assistance funding just in terms of living, aging services for older refugees, social services for populations who need those, and preventative health screenings. And they are served by the community primarily in which they're living around mostly these kinds of subsistence, educational, employment, and physical health kinds of issues. Well, Josh Henson looked at this and realized that nobody was looking at their mental health issues. And you read about gun violence in this country almost monthly, and everybody talks about what are we doing about mental health, what are we doing about mental health. We're here with roughly 3,000 people a year coming here. We're looking into their physical health and their employment needs and their educational needs and some of their family and social needs, but nobody was really looking in North Carolina at their mental health needs. So that's where Josh came up with this idea and developed it, and I'll let him tell you about the specifics. And the students who are with him are the ones who have really been providing the mental health services. They're being trained in providing social work mental health services. And I don't know if you're aware, but social workers at the master's level are the largest mental health providers in the United States. We provide more mental health services than any other profession, and these students are being trained to do just that. And they're focusing on this sort of global, to our back door kind of problem. And so I'll turn it over to Josh.
Good morning. It's an honor to get to share with you the work that we've been doing over the last year. As Dean Richmond explained, the federal and state governments provide for core services for refugees, but in many states, including North Carolina, mental health screenings are not conducted as a part of the resettlement process. And for North Carolina healthcare providers and resettlement agencies, there's been an ethical incentive up to this point not to ask the mental health question, not to ask, how are you feeling, because there have been few, if any, mental health services to refer refugees to if the answer was, well, I'm not feeling too well. But as social workers, we have an ethical obligation to develop new services when we see that they're lacking in the community. And the research nationally and globally indicates that mental health services are needed for refugees. The World Health Organization estimates that half of all refugees in the world have mental health concerns as a result of the traumatic experiences that they have experienced, which lead to them becoming refugees. They witness killings, they lose their family members and homes. Many times they suffer torture, sexual violence, detention, displacement. They live in overcrowded camps before they come here. They feel uncertain about the future, and then they experience significant stress when they go to host countries. They're acculturating to life in a new country, and all of this contributes to a higher prevalence rate of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression for refugees in this country especially. So while we know that refugees show higher levels of psychological disturbance than the general population here, there's an estimated 40% of refugees in the U.S. who need mental health services but can't access those services. And the barriers to accessing mental health services include interpretation costs. Interpretation is not covered by Medicaid in North Carolina. Transportation, a lack of culturally competent providers, people who know what the specific and especially trauma-related needs of refugees are, and the stigma that surrounds mental health in some refugee cultures. But despite all of this, we also know that refugees are resilient. If they can access appropriate treatment, they typically become functional and self-supporting members of our society, and they have talents and skills that benefit our economies and our communities. So this is the context that the School of Social Work got involved. Our MSW students began requesting opportunities for training and providing mental health services to refugees, but without having mental health agencies that already serve refugees in the community, we had no place to send students for training. Then in 2012, through our work with the National Partnership for Community Training, I had the opportunity to begin partnering with Church World Service in Durham, which is a national nonprofit that has agencies throughout the country. And we began working with them to develop a program where we would screen and treat the refugees that they were resettling. And with the support of the Armfield Reeves Innovation Fund that Dr. Richmond mentioned, we've been able to contract interpreters through the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, another resettlement agency in Raleigh. And having trained interpreters is prerequisite for working with refugees. Being able to hire those interpreters has been radical because there are no funding streams currently available in North Carolina to reimburse for mental health providers for interpretation services. So we launched the Refugee Mental Health and Wellness Initiative in the 2013-2014 academic year. And the School of Social Work's Field Education Office assigned 3 students whose year-long internship was working 2 to 3 days a week on processing referrals from Church World Service, conducting the screenings, providing the treatment, collecting research data on the extent and severity of refugees' mental health needs, and looking at the feasibility and acceptability of offering screenings and services. Could we do it? Did folks want it? Would they accept it? So you can see that our MSW students were responsible for delivering the services, and they're here today. They are Albert Thoreau, who graduated this month, and he's still here. He's coming back, so I think that tells you something about the dedication of these students. And Allie Hill and Aaron McGee, who are both rising final year students in our program. And they applied what they were learning in their MSW coursework to develop a screening and treatment program that was brand new. They reviewed the research literature to identify what the evidence-based practices were, and they applied the research on cultural competency to adapt those practices to meet the needs of their refugee clients in this community. They practiced the skills they were learning in their individual and group treatment classes to form therapeutic relationships with refugees. They established treatment goals, and they helped refugee clients achieve those goals. They applied what they were learning in their community and organizational practice classes to think critically about the impact that federal and state and organizational policies were having on refugees, and they developed relationships with community partners to build the community's capacity to serve these refugees in a sustainable fashion. And finally, they used what they were learning in their research methods and evaluation classes to refine the research questions that we were asking and to collect data and to analyze that data so that we could determine the effectiveness of our interventions. In my experience, this project has been exemplary of the community-engaged scholarship process that we talk so much about. It's given us a perfect opportunity to combine research, teaching, and training, and community service in order to address a social problem that obviously has local, state, national, and even global implications. So I'm going to turn it over now to the students to reflect on their experiences with this project and to share how they've seen it impact the lives of refugees.
Good morning. My name is Erin McGee, and thank you so much for this opportunity to come and share with you a little bit about what it's been like to be on the project this year. It has been so exciting and truly a privilege to be a part of the work that is happening and to see the impact on the lives of our new members of our community. The story I'd like to share with you this morning is from a support group that I led with some of our Sudanese clients. This group met once a week at a member's home and was comprised of 8 men from the Sudan. The purpose of this group was to help clients adjust to their new home and process their new experiences, thus contributing to their mental health and well-being. It was also designed to help our clients rebuild a meaningful sense of community. The refugee experience had separated them from their families and loved ones and destroyed the social fabric that is so critical in cultures more collectivistic than the U.S. Isolation negatively affects mental health, and the group sought to reduce the feelings of anxiety caused by loneliness and to facilitate the formation of a social support system. The change was gradual, but over the course of my time with these men, it was incredible to begin to see them take an active role in each other's lives. When the group first began meeting, there was a sense of defeat. Learning English was really hard. So many job applications had been sent out, but very few interviews had been given. The bus system was difficult to navigate, and they felt uncomfortable in their neighborhood. But through sharing their experiences, a bond of commonality began to form. When one man needed directions to the literacy center, another man offered to help take him on the bus. 2 men had been unable to get dental appointments at the nearby clinic, but a third member of the group knew of an office that was accepting new Medicaid clients. As they shared their experiences of conflict and trauma with one another, they began to recognize strengths in themselves. In our last meeting, the mood was markedly changed. The men insisted on fixing us a feast of traditional Sudanese food to celebrate the time that we had shared together. Instead of defeat, there was a sense of confidence, of optimism, and of hope. One of the men said, "Although you are leaving, you have given us good information, and that stays with us." Seeing community capacity building, something we talk about in our classes, as tangible and achievable was exceptionally powerful for me. Theory truly translated into practice. Creating field partnerships in tandem with research and education has been invaluable in inspiring and focusing my own studies. I appreciated the opportunity to do community-based participatory research, an experience I will carry forward with me. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. I also very much appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the experiences I had working with the Refugee Mental Health and Wellness Initiative. It became clear to me very early on in this project that I was privileged to be working on something so unique and important. One of the very first refugees we provided a mental health screening for was a man whom I will call Nadir. Nadir had fled Iraq with his wife to give his 5 children a life free of violence and religious discrimination. When we began asking Nadir how he was feeling, it was like we had opened a high-pressure valve. Emotions and worries began pouring out of him. During this outpour, Nadir said something that moved me immensely. He said that throughout his whole experience with the refugee system, from the Jordanian refugee camp he had fled to, through UNHCR processing and resettlement in North Carolina, through that whole process, he said, "No one has ever asked me how I was feeling before today." He had feared for his life, lost loved ones to violence, uprooted his whole family to start over from scratch in a foreign country where he did not speak the language, and no one had ever asked him, "Are you doing okay?" Nadir was only the first among many refugees to tell us this exact thing. No one is asking us how we are feeling. One of my therapy clients, a man from the Sudan, said to me, "To be asked how I am feeling makes me feel human again." There are reasons why the refugee resettlement system as it exists doesn't encompass mental health services, as Josh spoke to earlier. And this makes it vitally important that the communities welcoming these new Americans, our communities, be ready to provide that outlet for people like Nadir. People who have been through unimaginable struggles and who have never been offered an opportunity to unburden themselves of that pain, to relieve some of that pressure that they have built up inside. The School of Social Work is uniquely positioned to develop and deploy innovative initiatives like this. It has a faculty dedicated not only to teaching, but also to cutting-edge research and service, and students who are passionate and eager for educational and leadership opportunities. I will forever be grateful to the university and to the School of Social Work for fostering a culture that is dedicated to more than just enriching the minds of students so that they may one day help people in the future, but demands that students take their knowledge out of the ivory tower of academia and use it to change the lives of real people today. Thank you. I think maybe we have time for a couple of questions. Do we? We do.
Thank you. I think you can see the students are very excited, and this is a very innovative program. Immigration was a major issue, perhaps in your lives. Ellis Island was very busy in 1910, 20, 30, and 40. And before that, immigration in the 1890s was huge in this country. We lost that because immigration slowed to a great extent. And I don't think Ellis Island has ever been quite as busy as it was. But it still is an issue, and I didn't realize how large of an issue this is. And I think when Albert says nobody ever asked, "How are you feeling?" mental health is often not seen as a priority. And I think we see that that becomes a kind of a regular problem. So you have a plethora of people to potentially ask questions from the student point of view, from the developing faculty's point of view. I'd be happy to entertain whatever you'd like to talk about. Sir.
You mentioned family unit coming up, the deer family number.
That's correct.
Albert, come on.
In terms of the clients we were seeing, that was the exception, actually. Most of the individuals we were seeing were men coming over alone. We worked with a few family units, but it is, at least in my personal experience with this area, that was the exception.
Are they able to bring their families back if they want to?
Yes, so that's, many of our clients had this goal of coming to America, finding a place to work, establishing some sort of life, and then applying to have their family come follow them here. Yeah, that's very common.
Are any of these undocumented workers at all, or are they totally through the refugee status?
We work completely with people with official refugee status. Yeah, we don't work with undocumented individuals.
And it looks like there's some relationship that you work with the religious institutions as well as the governmental institutions, and how helpful have they been in what you're doing?
Religious institutions, we don't have formal partnerships with any, but they are very active in this community, and so our efforts overlap with theirs quite a bit. And in some cases, we have, again, informally sort of coordinated services with them, because as mental health practitioners, we can do a certain amount of psychotherapy, mental health work, but there are some more basic material needs that other communities serve better, actually. You know, if someone needs a couch, that's not exactly a mental health service, so we can divert that.
And I can speak a little bit, too, to the collaborations that our partner organizations have with the faith communities. Church World Service, our main partner, is actually not religiously affiliated nonprofit organization, but certainly they do partner with churches and faith communities to help provide volunteer services to refugees. And we hope to continue this project. This was a one-year pilot. We're continuing to search for grant funding to go into year 2 and subsequent years. And part of that will be broadening the impact, going out and providing training to community members on mental health, to other refugee community groups about mental health services, provider trainings on how to serve those groups. And so among those will be other faith groups, yes.
This is great work. I have 2 questions. One is for individuals who are in need of the more extended or personal clinical treatment, what's the way to help them? And second, do you have an advocacy role so that these individuals can take advantage of services that are available in the community, but they might perhaps feel isolated from them or not be aware of them?
Yeah, and that was a key part of what we, and especially the students, were doing. We wanted to get refugees connected with mental health services in the community. And what we found out was those services aren't there. And so we were advocating with the managed care organizations to say, there's a population in need here. How are you going to serve them? And they would say, well, they can access our telephonic intake line, and we'll be able to do interpretation services for the intake on the phone. But then we said, what about when they show up to see a therapist? Who's going to interpret? And there was no answer to that. So that is where we need to continue to advocate. And I had the privilege yesterday of presenting to the North Carolina Refugee Advisory Council, talking with other refugee resettlement organizations across the state, a lot of whom are working on advocating in their communities to get providers aware of the issue and to think about ways of advocating for policy change to make interpretation of Medicaid reimbursable service, or to find other ways of working around that. We are hoping, if we can continue this project, for example, to bring down an organization from Maryland called Voice of Love that provides interpreter training for interpreters to work with refugee survivors of war trauma and sexual violence. So we're talking about a lot of opportunities to hugely expand the capacity in North Carolina and to expand the availability of trained interpreters. One other thing that we did do was for folks who had a more severe need, we partnered with the Department of Psychiatry here in UNC hospitals so that if someone needed a psychiatric evaluation, if someone needed medication and follow-up, we could refer to them. We, through the Armfield Reeves Fund, could provide for interpretation costs, and then we would find other ways of making that sustainable.
I have a question for Aaron and Albert. How did you come to Carolina, and how did you end up where you are, and did you know you'd be involved in a program like this?
All right. That's a long story. I became interested in mental health following conflict and war. I was teaching English in South Korea and was traveling in Southeast Asia, sort of seeing the mental health impact that was continuing in places like Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge regime. And then bringing that back to the U.S., I started exploring different programs. And like Dean Richmond said, social workers are the ones providing these services. And it also, the two areas that I wanted, working with marginalized populations and also working in mental health, combined perfectly in social work. So that is how I ended up here, studying social work.
For the second half of that, then how we got attracted to this particular project, I as well had an interest in global issues, mental health work, and when I was looking for a field placement for my second year in the program, I attended a session that Josh was holding where he was talking about this program and how it ties in with a certificate program he also runs. And he described the program, and I immediately lit up inside because it sounded new, it sounded dangerous, it sounded effective. I mean, dangerous in the way that it was very unusual. It's a very new model for field education for the school, and I was very excited to get in on the ground floor, help build the program, and that really paid off. It gave me immense professional experience in program development, and it's been exactly what I wanted out of it.
I just have to point out, Allie may not want me to, that Allie has done work internationally that has brought her here with goals to continue working internationally.
Hi. Yes, I worked for a year in Nashville, Tennessee, with a refugee refugee nonprofit that served refugees that were resettled in Nashville. And after that year, my husband and I moved to the Republic of Congo, where we worked for 2 years with Hope International, which is a Christian microfinance organization, where we did microfinance work. And so after spending 2 years there and seeing a lot of displaced people within the country, from also DRC, is the neighboring Congo, to the Republic of Congo, I just had an interest in working with refugees in the U.S. And Josh has started the certificate in global transmigration at the School of Social Work, which really brought me to UNC. It's kind of training on how to specially work with individuals who are dealing with issues of migration, whether it be immigrants, undocumented immigrants, refugees. So that's what initially brought me here to UNC, and then this program with refugee mental health was just perfect. So it's a great match. Thank you.
She was a guest speaker who wasn't supposed to talk, but we're glad to have her. I think you can see it's an exciting program. The students bring so much energy to this. They come from they bring such a wealth of experience, and we are lucky to have them. We hope to keep them in North Carolina for a while so they can help our communities with our kinds of issues. So it's very exciting, and we appreciate the time. And if you want to know more about it, please come over. We'd be happy to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack, Josh, Albert, Allie, and Aaron for coming here. This, as I said, we've been really looking at the service, but again, I don't think you could come up with a better example of what a great global public research university in America can do. And so it's just fabulous to see that. And I think that also shows something else we've been talking a lot about. This is a case where philanthropy is really, and a partnership with another organization, in this case a religious organization, is actually funding a deeply public mission. So another very important message for us.